From our Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. The New York Times reports that since April 18th, more than 2,500 people at nearly 50 schools have been detained on campuses across the U.S. Close to 3 weeks of generally peaceful demonstrations have prompted police raids and arrests, with what a number of observers say is law enforcement reacting in a heavy-handed manner. The protests have also affected graduation ceremonies, with Columbia University canceling its main one. University of Chicago police raided and destroyed the campus's Free-Palestine camp early this morning. As protesters were forced out, they chanted, "Shame on you," and "The whole world is watching." The protesters had been in negotiation and were close to an agreement over an 8 days long camp when the university abruptly walked out of negotiations on Sunday. During a press conference by the U-Chicago Faculty for Justice in Palestine on Monday, faculty members called for the university administration to allow the encampment to continue. They also called for it to acknowledge the destruction of universities in Gaza and resume negotiating with encampment organizers. Nearly 30 organizations and businesses have written to senior law enforcement and city officials calling for an explanation for the violent response to peaceful protesters at University of Texas at Dallas last week. It includes the Islamic Association of North Texas, or IANT, along with 27 other houses of worship. 18 students and 3 professors were arrested at the UTD campus after attempting to set up an encampment similar to those across the nation. They were charged with misdemeanor criminal trespass. The encampment was up for 12 hours when local police departments and Texas state troopers carrying batons and zip ties began arresting protesters, dismantling tents, and loading the encampment supplies onto pickup trucks. IANT representative and attorney Khalid Hamideh says the organization felt compelled to speak out on behalf of the brave students at UTD. He said, "We believe they have been unfairly targeted by shameful and hateful policies from our governor's office." The letter condemns law enforcement's heavy-handed response and makes an unequivocal demand that the city of Richardson, RPD, and the university safeguard the constitutional rights of the community's students and their well-being. 13 federal judges say they will not hire law clerks from Columbia College or Columbia Law School. This is after the university allowed an encampment on its lawn to spiral into an occupation of a campus building. Led by appellate judges James Ho and Elizabeth Branch, the judges wrote in a letter to Columbia President Minouche Shafik that they would no longer hire anyone who joins the Columbia University community, whether as undergraduates or as law students, beginning with the entering class of 2024. The judges cited what they called the explosion of student disruptions and the virulent spread of anti-Semitism at Columbia. Ho and Branch both spearheaded a clerkship boycott of Yale Law School in 2022 and Stanford Law School last year. Israeli Americans sue American Muslims for Palestine and others. Details after the break, so stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Israeli American survivors of Hamas's October 7th attack are suing pro-Palestinian activists amid nationwide campus protests against Israel's war on Gaza. The lawsuit was filed in the United District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia on Wednesday. It alleges that National Students for Justice in Palestine and American Muslims for Palestine are aiding and abetting terrorists. The plaintiffs include 5 U.S. citizens and 1 whose brother was killed in that attack. The lawsuit accuses NSJP and AMP of coordinating what it calls occupation of dozens of college campuses across the country to force the American government and academia to bend to Hamas's will. Protest organizers, including students who are Jewish, say their movement is peaceful, protesting the war and defending Palestinian rights. Critics of Israel also say that allegations of anti-Semitism are being weaponized to smear student protesters and deflect from Israel's war on Gaza. It is seeking unspecified damages and a jury trial. In January, U.S. civil liberties group the Center for Constitutional Rights filed a lawsuit in a California federal court. This was on behalf of a number of Palestinian groups, as well as 8 Palestinians and U.S. citizens with relatives in Gaza. They accused Biden and other senior U.S. officials of failing to prevent and being complicit in Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza. Observers are calling it an incredible mask-off moment. A discussion last weekend at the Sedona Forum in Arizona between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Senator Mitt Romney revealed the extent of the U.S. government's long-term pro-Israel public relations work. The discussion blew the lid off the government's push to ban TikTok in order to shut down Americans' access to unfiltered news about Israel's war on Gaza. Romney asked Blinken at the McCain Institute event's keynote conversation why Israel's PR has been so awful. The Republican senator said, typically the Israelis are good at PR. What's happened here? How have they and we been so ineffective at communicating the realities there? 2/3 of Americans want the Biden administration to push for a permanent ceasefire, and 57% disapprove of President Joe Biden's approach to the war. Blinken claimed the reason for Israel's failure on the PR front this time was that the way Israel's war has played out on social media has dominated the narrative, saying it has had a very, very challenging effect. Romney suggested that banning TikTok would quiet the growing outrage over Israeli atrocities in the United States. The interview took place amid a growing anti-war movement on college campuses across the U.S. and around the world. American police forces have responded aggressively to student protests, demanding that higher education institutions divest from companies that contract with Israel and that the U.S. stop funding Israel's military. Entrepreneur James Rosenberg said of the McCain Institute discussion, Mitt Romney flat out asking Antony Blinken in public why the United States is not doing a better job manufacturing consent is wild. The Washington Post reports that an unnamed U.S. official says Washington has told Qatar to expel Hamas if the group continues to reject a ceasefire deal with Israel. Qatar has hosted Hamas's political leaders since 2012 as part of an agreement with the U.S. Although the United States has designated Qatar as a major non-NATO ally, it has come under fire from the U.S. and Israel over its ties to Hamas. Some U.S. lawmakers have called on President Joe Biden to re-evaluate its ties with Qatar if it does not pressure Hamas to make a deal to release Israeli prisoners, while others have urged Qatar to cut ties with Hamas. Hamas has accepted a US-mediated ceasefire proposal that it says would ensure a permanent end to the war and the exchange of all Israeli captives with Palestinian prisoners. Israel said it does not agree to the terms of the proposal, but added that a delegation would be sent to Cairo to find an agreement. This, however, did not stop its intensified carpet bombing campaign on Rafah on Monday night. That included strikes with ground advances shortly after Hamas agreed to the ceasefire proposal. Rafah was struck with airstrikes and artillery shelling, according to Palestinian news outlets, with several people reported killed and wounded. Nearly 7 months into the Israeli war, vast swaths of Gaza are in ruins, with 85% of Gaza's people internally displaced amid a crippling blockade of food, clean water, and medicine, according to the UN. Israel stands accused of genocide at the International Court of Justice. An interim ruling in January said it is plausible that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. It also ordered Tel Aviv to stop such acts and take measures to guarantee that humanitarian assistance is provided to civilians in Gaza. New York Supreme Court Justice Juan Merchan has once again threatened Donald Trump with jail time, holding him in contempt of court for the 10th time. On Monday, it was for violating a gag order prohibiting him from attacking prospective witnesses in the case. Merchan warned Trump he could be jailed if he continued to ignore the order, which he called a direct attack on the rule of law. He fined Trump another $1,000 for the violation of the gag order, on top of the $9,000 he fined him last week for another 9 violations of the gag order. This took place at the outset of the third week of testimony at Trump's trial. The ex-president is accused of falsifying business records at his Trump organization to hide a $130,000 hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. A delegation from Afghanistan's interim Taliban government participated in the 15th Summit of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation held in Banjul, the capital of Gambia. The delegation also held meetings and exchanged views on a range of bilateral and multilateral matters with high-level officials of the OIC and representatives of member states on the sidelines. The 2-day session also featured discussions on regional issues, including the situation in Gaza, the recognition of the Palestinian state, and conflicts in Libya, Sudan, and Yemen. A group of Uyghur Turks living in Paris gathered on Monday to protest against Chinese President Xi Jinping's official visit to France. The demonstrators aim to condemn China's oppression against Uyghurs, who are mostly Muslim, living in East Turkestan, which the Chinese government calls the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. At least 1 million Uyghurs are estimated to be kept against their will in what Beijing calls vocational training centers. But human rights groups have reported evidence that the facilities are meant for indoctrination, abuse, and torture. Beijing has rejected the accusations. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon for the latest updates. Your support is needed more than ever to continue our mission of providing informative, educational, and inspiring content to Muslims in North America and around the world. Donate now by visiting muslimnetwork.tv/donate. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.